Welcome. Today I'm going to be discussing the Freedom Dividend as proposed by Andrew Yang. First, I would like to actively disclose and disclaim the fact that I am utterly biased. As you can see above me, I actually have some of his merch. I support this candidate more than I have ever supported any other candidate that I've seen in my lifetime. And for reference, I'm 33 and been politically involved my entire adulthood. So, that out of the way, I'm going to assume that at least some of you listening have never heard of a concept quite like the Freedom Dividend before. The Freedom Dividend is a form of what is known as a Universal Basic Income, or UBI. So I will start with a definition of UBI as stated by the Basic Income Earth Network. A basic income is a periodic cash payment unconditionally delivered to all on an individual basis without means test or work requirements. This is one of the cleanest definitions of a universal basic income. The Freedom Dividend matches that definition in that it is meant to go to every American citizen who is considered an adult in our society, regardless of their abilities and regardless of employment. This is an important facet of it because it would go to absolutely everyone, from those most in need to those least in need. It would go to any adult children you may have, as well as your parents and yourself. Siblings, everything. And all of you will get one separately. Now, the Freedom Dividend is set at $1,000 a month, which comes to $12,000 a year. This is pretty close to the US poverty line. And as I talked about in a previous video that I created, it comes to roughly $33 a day, which for some people may be life-changing. For others, it might seem really small, because honestly, this is a pretty reserved dividend. This is one of the more discussed and contemplated levels to set a basic income at, but it's still not enough to live on by itself, at least not for a singular person. Now, for families, this would mean every adult in the household will get a separate dividend. If it is just you and your partner, that would be $2,000. Now, that is assuming that you share. The Freedom Dividend is meant to be given out individually. And while there are still some details as to the delivery of it to be worked out, on how to keep it from potentially being abused by, say, a dominating member of the household, right now it looks like the method of delivery will probably include some type of standard account that is given out to citizens. Notably, the Freedom Dividend is available to only citizens, and also only to those that are not currently imprisoned. Partly to help motivate people to stay away from crime, because if you commit a crime and become jailed, you will lose your Freedom Dividend for the duration of that time that you are jailed. The Freedom Dividend itself does stack with a handful of the current support net programs that are set up in our country, but most of them you would not qualify for if you were receiving it because of whatever reason. most often because the income limit on them would simply not allow you to have the extra 1,000 and whatever you're currently getting. Because of this, it's currently assumed that the Freedom Dividend will basically reduce enrollment in a lot of those programs. And I phrase it like that because the Freedom Dividend is going to be something that is an opt-in. There are a handful of people in our country that get enough from the various welfare supports, they might not want the Freedom Dividend. But if you're right on the line, there are good reasons to consider it. And those include the fact that, again, it is not means tested. You won't have to constantly return down to your support office and supply all of your records, be they medical or employment or whatever. You won't have to mess with that. It'd be reliable. You wouldn't have to worry about, oh, if I take this extra shift at work, will I lose my assistance? Because this is a floor, not a ceiling. The concept of a basic income is that it is given regardless. It provides a proper safety net, one that you should never be without, one you can't drop below. Whereas many of the safety nets in our country right now require you hit the bottom before you can even apply for them. So, you might have some assorted questions about the Freedom Dividend. There's a lot to be asked. I did already cover why it's $1,000. That's very close to our poverty level, which means it would essentially wipe out mathematical poverty. It would also act as a support for many people with large amounts of debt. Particularly relevant would be college and medical debt, which many families have. It's also been found in recent studies that many families in our country are living so close to being paycheck to paycheck that a $400 to $500 emergency would essentially cripple their finances. And we have seen in recent times with the extended government shutdown that even those with what were once considered relatively stable and really good jobs are vulnerable to pretty damning consequences for missing a paycheck. I fear the way that families must have to go to sleep at night wondering if a simple car accident or cold could cost them their livelihood. The Freedom Dividend is separate from any kind of Medicare for All, but it is certainly benefited by it. Also, Yang does support some kind of single payer to Medicare for All plan, though the Freedom Dividend is his topmost priority. The Freedom Dividend is also complemented by the third portion of his top tier policies, which the top three are the Freedom Dividend, a Medicare for All like system, and human-centered capitalism, which without the Freedom Dividend, it is still very valid. Human-centered capitalism is supposed to be as simply a change of how we measure our success in the country. It is as simple as going down and saying, hey, GDP, it's old. It only measures products. It's measuring something that is really inhuman, not helpful. As far as GDP is concerned, a hurricane might be a good thing. So what would we measure instead? Health, employment, childhood success rates, mental well-being. There's a whole massive list, and I'll be linking to various sections of Mr. Yang's site, which will include the section on the Freedom Dividend itself, and will give a much more comprehensive understanding of it than I can. But going back to the Freedom Dividend, it is simply an idea whose time has come. The concept of providing a basic floor to meet the needs of everyone in your society is an old one. It was even talked about by one of our founding fathers, Sir Thomas Paine. And has been promoted by many of the most influential people in our history, including Martin Luther King. Some of our other previous presidents have also talked about it, including Nixon, who came very close to passing a basic income-like plan. And more recently, Barack Obama has also mentioned that it is probably one of the best solutions to the rising tide of automation. If you're not aware, automation has to do with computing and artificial intelligence, and has caused a lot of the job loss that we have been seeing in our country in recent years. As machines have become more and more efficient and more able to teach themselves a task, they've become more generalized, more able to be simply reprogrammed, reused, and put back to task. Think of it kind of like the difference in the giant monolithic computers that started computing versus when you started being able to get a computer in your own home. That marked a sea change in the way that our world functioned. And we're seeing a similar shift start to pick up with artificial intelligence right now. By some estimates, we could see a loss of as much as half of the jobs in our whole country and potentially the world within just a couple of decades. And while I myself am unable to have children, I do have nieces and nephews. And the thought that they are about to reach adulthood in a world where most of what they might want to do or spend years becoming trained to do is going to evaporate in front of their eyes is a scary one. But basic income isn't just meant to cope with that. There are some people who believe a basic income will help a great deal in some of the other problems that we are currently facing, like climate change, because it's hard to think about something you're being told is going to happen in a decade when you're struggling to make next month's rent. It's really just out of your mind. It's not something you can afford the mental bandwidth to worry about. I believe personally that basic income as an idea would do wonders for our country and our world. And my basic income series is about that in depth. And I'll admit, just hearing that Mr. Yang wanted to try a basic income is what originally brought me to his campaign. And then I was just simply shocked at how well put together the Freedom Dividend program really is. It's one of the best laid out versions of a basic income for our country that I have ever seen. And I've been interested in and picking up information about basic income for around 7 years. So seeing such a beautifully put together plan was kind of staggering. So please, go to the links, look at it, ask yourself what you think $1,000 a month for everyone in your household, in your community, would do to it. What kind of benefits could be had with that? How many more children could be fed, clothed, schooled, and well taken care of? How many fewer nights would people in your family alone be able to go to sleep in peace rather than crying themselves to it because they're afraid of what will happen if they can't pay that next bill? I have been there. It is a terrifying thought that if that next little bit of money isn't there, you could lose so much of what's important to your life. And that fear, that gripping terror that money is going to destroy everything is something quintessential to the way that we have shaped our lives. In this country, we have a almost religious way that we treat work. We treat drawing a paycheck as a measure of a person, which means some of the most valuable and powerful work in our country is simply not acknowledged. What worth did our country give to your parents sitting with you to help you with homework? Almost nothing. How many children are essentially forced into daycare because one of their parents can't afford to quit their job to actually take care of them at home? The ideal family where only one parent works and the other stays home with the kids almost never happens in our country anymore. And the Freedom Dividend could change that. It could let you spend more time with your family. It could make it so that if something happens and you're suddenly taking care of a disabled family member, it's not earth-shattering. It would let so many people escape abuse at home, at work, and give security to some of us who have been on the receiving end of undue prejudice. How many people out there that you know have lost a job and simply not had an answer as to why, but they suspect it has to do with something about who they are, be it the color of their skin, their gender, the person that they choose to spend their life with? I'm part of the LGBTQ community. So many of us have spent time homeless that it's almost something that the community just accepts happens, and that's terrible. Imagine the peace of mind that you could have if you could know that regardless of the circumstances of who and what your child is, when they become an adult, they will have something to fall back on. Regardless of whatever their mental abilities or where they were born in our country, they will always have enough to at least feed themselves. To be able to keep clean and be healthier. $1,000 a month really doesn't seem like a lot to some people, but it would create a sea change in how we see everything and everyone. The value of work would change. It would be like getting around a $6.25 raise on the first 40 hours you work in a week. I know that's below minimum wage right now, but many of the people who are going to be old enough to vote this go around have worked for that wage, or one of their parents has. So we have a decent feel for that. $6.25. Wasn't a lot at the time, was it? I know I worked for that wage for a while, and I was still able to work. I'm disabled now. In December, it will have been a decade since I last worked. I don't get any help from the government because my husband makes too much money. They pretty much told me I'd have to take my name off of everything and divorce him to even submit my application with any hope for assistance. Despite the fact that I have a much larger number of medical bills than he has ever had. Just in this last year, I've been to the doctor more than I think he has in our whole marriage. And in December, that's gonna be 13 years. In the last year, I've been to the doctor more than he has in 13. The food I need to stay relatively stable with some of my conditions costs 3 times as much as what his does. He has said himself, it costs more to live disabled. And it does. But our current system says I can't get any assistance. And that is how it is for a lot of people in a similar situation to my own. The Freedom Dividend would give us a whole new lease on life. For me, in our situation, an extra $200 would change a lot, including a great deal of the guilt I feel for eating up so much more of our budget. The Freedom Dividend will change people's lives. It will change their health, their mental well-being, give us all more opportunities to pursue something that we love, something that we're going to feel fulfilled doing, rather than just what's financially most needed. And on the whole, I support Mr. Yang. I know some of you, if you've been listening to politics prior to now, may say, but haven't some of the other candidates suggested something similar to this or talked about it before? And they have. Right now, I believe that Kamala Harris has a policy that would give a $500 allotment to families making below a certain range. Bernie Sanders has previously mentioned it. Right now, he has other plans because he does not feel that we're at the point where that is called for yet. And a lot of people make an argument against basic income that it's not needed yet. But the question is, what's the downside to implementing one early? Whether or not we are at the point where it is necessary is completely beyond the fact that it would do so much good. It would relieve immense suffering, stress, and hardship throughout our country. And this ran really long because I did not expect to get this emotional. But this matters to me personally. I well and truly believe in universal basic income. That's why I decided to make this whole channel. It's why I'm putting myself out there to try and explain it to people. Why I started my series. And I believe in this candidate. I think that his vision and the plan for the Freedom Dividend itself are really solid and powerful. And while I do not think I'm going to be making another video on Yang specifically, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to his other followers, the Yang Gang. Because all of my life I have been an outsider, and among the Yang Gang, I have found a place that is really open to me and welcoming despite my faults, despite that I am both physically disabled and non-neurotypical. These are some of the most welcoming and wholesome people you will ever meet. Even if you do not support our candidate, the Yang Gang is worth making friends with. I feel as if for the first time in my life, I have actually found my tribe. And I want to thank you all for that. That is part of why I believe so strongly in this movement. Because it is a movement. And the Yang Gang as a whole truly represents one of the slogans of the campaign. Humanity first. We are not thinking about left. We are not thinking about right. We are thinking about forward and the future. And if you've made it this far, thank you. And I hope that your life goes well. Please consider supporting the Freedom Dividend and the movement for universal basic income. Have a good evening.